Hello and welcome to Leading Dragons, the place where fearless leaders empower others to step into their authenticity through storytelling and insights. So today we have a very special guest that I had a bit of challenge pinning down. So I'm so delighted to have you today, Mike Vacanti.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation in, and actually for your graciousness of working through the scheduling. That was my fault for making an error, and you were gracious enough to invite me back in, so I appreciate that.
No hard feelings at all, Mike. You're a very busy man. You have I mean, today there's a lot that we can talk about. We were just before I hit the record button, we were just discussing one of the commonalities that we have, which is this from a feeling space, this sense of urgency for change.
Mm-hmm.
So organizational change, and change in the way that leadership behaves and comes across. But before we go into that, Mike, tell us a little bit about, who you are. I know that you have decades of organizational experience transforming businesses from a heart-centered space. So tell us more about that and about your book.
Great, thank you. I am from the United States. I'm in Minnesota, which is north central United States. It's where I was raised and has been home for most of my career. I've been out in other places for short periods of times, several years at a time. But I have experienced being an entrepreneur like through my 30s. For 13 years, I had my own marketing agency and many experiences, and I invented a child safety device for automobiles and went down that path for a while. And one of my marketing clients actually had this small technology that I helped him position that to win a big contract. And through learning about all of that, I realized that we could actually go out and get some venture funding and create something that really didn't exist at the time. So around 2000, we had one of the first unified messaging platforms on the planet. And all of a sudden, I found myself in the throes of technology, and I was enjoying the creativity of technology more than the business of creativity. And so I went full into it and ended up doing 5 different mergers and acquisitions with pretty major companies and running big teams with P&L responsibility and going through the fear and doubt and chaos of business mashups where people's lives are disrupted, yet the objective to achieve was still very prevalent. And it was just 5 years ago that I stepped away from my 5th merger and acquisition and was looking at the next step in my life. And I needed to go back and do a reflection of what were my experiences, what did I really want to do? And that's where the whole notion of believership came from, Deborah, is I went back and did a deep dive 360. Large packets of information went out, requests from those that worked for me or bosses of mine, people I worked for, clients, partnerships, even friends. And I discovered what they had experienced through our time together. And that really culminated in this idea of believership. I put a high achieving team program together, went out and was training companies on those principles. And that's when I really realized that we're hurting out in the workplace, that there's many that are physically, emotionally, mentally challenged to the point of breaking, and that we had a gap to fill. So we started this series of conversations in events, in live rooms across the country. We called it Humans First, and we simply asked the question, what's it like to be human in the workplace today? And it flourished into these deep dives into the real human experience we were having. And I think started to teach me a lot. And my mission now is just to share that back out and and allow a space to flourish where we can share those ideas, best ideas, and reinvention to meet these challenging times ahead.
Yeah, and what a noble cause, Mike, and so relevant for today. And you know, even when I'm thinking, gosh, we're 2021, and the majority of organizations have still a far way to go, especially because change is happening, but at an accelerated rate. So you mentioned the word believership, which takes me to your book, which I have right here. There we go. I got it delivered all the way from the US to Switzerland, and the superpower beyond leadership. So tell us, Mike, a little bit. Well, tell us what is believership?
It's actually what is taking place around great leaders. And so we've built these containers, Deborah, of what we think leadership is, or a list of traits and characteristics and behaviors that are leaders. And I think what we realize is when we look at the great leaders now in companies or historically, the one thing they truly had in common is many people did great work with them, around them. And it was because they believed in either the person or the vision, the mission, the purpose of the business. And they made the choice to commit themselves and go do their best work. And it really does draw a contrast between, I think, the myth, the fallacy that it is the controlling commander that really drives the vision and all the greatness that happens within a company. I don't believe that to be true. I think that great leaders are more different than they are alike. And we have an opportunity to understand that and embrace the uniqueness. But mostly it's to break the containers of the flawed belief that it is the highest authority that can dictate the actions of others that will bring us the best results. I think that's a lie we've been taught over time. And I think it's the systems that are at play now that are creating more challenge for humanity than solving.
Yeah, definitely. I find it very interesting the term that you've come up with, which is believership. And it made me think back to what is a belief, because the belief is, and correct me if I'm wrong, from what I remember back in the day, is that a belief is the foundation of our values.
Yes.
And a belief either comes from teaching or from experience. Am I on the right track so far?
Yes, yes.
And so believership, you said it's what happens around great leaders. So if it's what happens around great leaders, then there's a belief of a common goal, of a common vision, and or a belief and trust of the great leader. And so I'd like to go one step beyond that and ask you, so would that start with self-belief?
Absolutely. I believe that self-belief is critical to that. And then that provides us the basis to step forward genuinely, which is one of the principles. And in that view of ourselves, we also then put the attention on others and build our awareness of our environment, build our awareness of others that are near us, and awareness of the greater whole. And so it's genuineness, awareness, vision, and belief. And the belief is not only, yes, that culmination of values and how we show up, but it's also do I believe I can walk through that doorway? Do I believe that I'm worthy of creating the results? Do I believe in my actions and the next step? So there's a bit of, I think, faith in
Mhm,
there.
mhm.
And with that, then we bring up words like hope. And then people look at me and they say, well, those are like really soft notions. That's not real. How do you get there? And I love to, I love that challenge because I'll say that those are the core ideals that keep us moving, that keep us curious, that provide the fuel to every step along the journey. And
Mm.
they can't be dismissed. They actually need to be nurtured and grown and regenerated.
So, because you're using so many powerful words there, and even just the word awareness,
Mhm.
self-awareness. So that is from what I've seen, it's the foundation of conscious leadership. But if I was to ask you genuinely, Mike, how many conscious leaders who consider themselves conscious leaders are truly self-aware? And I don't take that, I don't use that term very lightly. I would say because self-awareness is a self-relationship. And on the back of my burnout, when I recovered from my burnout, I realized just how disconnected I truly was from myself. And that was a bit of a hit on the head, to say the least. And I realized that whilst I thought on the outside that I was continuously being authentic and empowering and others, uplifting others, and being and accompanying leaders, teams, and businesses to move into transforming and finding better ways of working together. I was disconnected from myself. Hence, I was just going straight for that wall and I kept going. So back to the question, Mike. So how much do you truly believe, if I was to say I've got 100 leaders that consider that they are practicing conscious leadership, how many of those 100 conscious leadership appliers, sorry for want of a better way of saying it, are actually truly self-aware?
I would say a very, very small number. And I get a chance to talk to hundreds over time, many, many leaders and very senior leaders with a lot of responsibility, say CEOs of
Mm-hmm.
companies.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, certainly degrees and levels. But within that, I would say that I personally have met and had conversations with a couple of leaders like that out of the hundreds. So we're into 1%, perhaps less than 1%. And then I think we have to, in context for that, then I also want to share my belief, and this isn't something I'm asking others to adopt, but I truly believe that most of those people
Mm.
that get elevated into a CEO job of major corporations are much more narcissistic than not. That's the container. Those are the traits and the skills and the beliefs we've built over time that we think that's what a leader is. And then when they get there, we condemn them for being that very thing that we promoted. And that's really where I go in the book is until we redefine what leadership is, we will always promote the narcissist. We will always have poor leadership.
And you did ask that very poignant question, which is, why is this command and control paradigm or model, why is it still prevailing, across the globe? What are we doing, or I should say more, what is it that we're not doing that in 2021, as we move into, probably the second half or the second half of our career lives, meaning, we're leaving this to our children. What are we going to leave for them? You know, what are the next generations stepping into? And have we really done, you know, what we could have done? And I'd like to move on to that wake up call, because from my experience, if we just sit and wait for the people in power to make any changes, we can just sit till the cows come home. When we see toxic behavior, or you know, behavior that's just shouldn't be tolerated in the workspace, why do we still just look at our shoes, or we just keep quiet, or we pretend we didn't hear it? Because all these tiny little things are what's keeping those narcissistic leaders where they are, and also recruiting the very, like we say, birds of a feather flock together, right? The same profiles, the copy paste profiles.
Right. It's interesting, Deborah, because we look at career advancement in many organizations still is dependent on me shining above you. So it's this kind of sharp elbows, stack ranking, get over the other person, at least to very politicized behavior, and all of the envy and the gossip and all of the negative things that we wish weren't present become actually the tools that are used. And those are silent tools. And that's what I challenge people on mostly is, if my statement of belief and choice and self-direction are and character are the core elements we want to look at, and you're telling me that those are soft elements, we have to look on the other side and say, it's actually those human elements that are driving the behaviors in the other way. And those are fear, envy, manipulation, gossip. And so it's not like one is a very well-written strategic plan, the other stuff is mushy. It's like, no, the strategic plan, all of the objectives is the same thing. It's how we're reacting and responding and living with that system that changes. And so I always challenge, it's like, it's not hard skills and soft skills, because hard skills don't go away.
They don't exclude one from the other.
Right. But it's the human behaviors. Which side are we on? Are we on this path of destructive behaviors, or are we on this path of elevating and building and productive behaviors?
And which brings me to before we step in, because we talk about stepping into our power. Mm-hmm. And so each one of us, we need to be extremely strong in the face of the adversity, our own adversity to start off with, which is all this fear-based energy, which goes from paralysis to overthinking, being critical, judging, worrying, being stressed, being depressed. I mean, all this stuff is all kind of like low energy, low frequency vibration. And that's not good for us, because we contract. And when we contract, and this is what happens in teams, so which is the exact opposite of what a high-performing team does. So in a place of crisis, where a great majority today can, you know, given the pandemic and all the measures, all what's, you know, the upheavals that it's been creating since, teams, departments, organizations are in crisis. Mm-hmm. And typically what groups of people do in terms of crisis is they silo, they go off, they go, can't talk to you right now, this is really urgent, I've got a you know, crisis mode, when in fact we should be doing the exact opposite, which is opening the doors and bringing everyone together and saying, we're in this ship, I was going to say this ship together, right? So let's find, let's leverage.
That could be P or T, and they'd both be accurate.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why I was laughing. Yeah. So we're in this together. So, you know, let's just put our papers and pens down, move away from our screens, and let's start reconnecting with one another. because we're all in this together. And this seems to be so hard to do. Even just in normal times. I know that you don't like the word norm or normal, but it's just in, you know, when we're just sailing, when the business is just sailing, even in those times, it seems to be so, the typical leadership behavior is still so much ego driven that they can't possibly leave their ego at the door when they badge in and go, okay, you know what, I don't need to have the answers for today. That's why I've got a team. That's why I've recruited my team. I've recruited my people. And because I believe in the collective compared to the, you know, the individual competition.
Yeah, it's hard to break out of what we've been taught and what has worked for us to get to the point that we were at, right? And so I think of even, you know, in a team basis, in the experiences I had, Deborah, I would go into one market. I had teams in many markets, right? And I let them operate a little bit autonomously based on their market and the personalities on that team. There are some guiding principles, certainly, but even as we had team meetings, as we set agendas, you know, it's amazing how many people will come up and be put in that manager or leader role, and they'll just adhere to whatever was there at the beginning. So the agenda for this meeting, Deborah, is, you know, A, B, C, D. We do it efficiently. We're going to do it well, and then break. Everybody go do their work. I would walk in and say, we know what we need to accomplish at the end of this, but who would like to run the agenda today? Should we tweak the agenda? How are you doing? How are you feeling? You just had this experience. Would you like to share with it? And open those things up. Because in the end, it's like, okay, 5 minutes now, let's get our assignments down. Like, everybody, do you know what ball you're taking off the table and running with today? If not, we'll convene later and get that done. But everybody would say, yeah, I know what my responsibilities are. Good, then let's go. But we accomplished something more valuable during that time. Now, we don't do that every time we gather, but changing the rhythm, opening the door, as you well articulated, that's the opportunity. Why do we continue the patterns that have been handed to us when we're experiencing that 70% of people in the workplace are disengaged, 85% globally are disengaged? And what's really interesting about, you know, those statistics from Gallup that have been around forever and, you know, are talked about very often, what we miss from that is, where do you think the highest rate of burnout is inside a company?
Okay, so I've done a little bit of research, obviously, on particularly on, not on disengagement, but actually burnout. And from what I've understood, is that the number one risk profiles for burnout are those who have high demanding jobs and low job control.
Yeah. And many of those people are very self-driven, and they're achievement based, and they are in the 15% of the highly engaged, or the 30% of the highly engaged. It's those that care enough to contribute that are the ones that are burning out. And I don't think we pause enough to recognize that. How do we refuel and honor the contributions of those people? And you described a couple of those elements, right? So a lot of demand and very little control. Those are things that we can make a decision to toggle that and give people more recognition for their contribution, give them more time and space to recover, but certainly allow them the respect and responsibility to work within their own personal rhythm, because nobody works the same as the person next to them. some people are very constant, always on contributors, and some people work in kind of waves of brilliance.
Mm-hmm.
And we will look at that wave of brilliance and say, that's not the way Deborah does it. I need you, Mike, to become more like Deborah. And so you're going to break down my greatest strengths to have me be a lesser version of you, which neither things are good. And in that essence, we burn people out.
And so, Mike, leading dragons is really about, I say, fearless leaders. So the dragon is not the dragon as we typically in the Western culture, we depict it as a very harmful creature. The dragon is from the Eastern culture as a leading dragon that stands in their power. And that is a very, so they stand in their power and they recognize that, because we're not machines, like we said, and we can be faced with fear or doubt. And that's how it goes. That's how we are made. And it's about dancing through the fear and harnessing it rather than allowing it to take over our lives, paralyze us, stifle us from action. And so, Mike, is there a story that you would like to share, a time where you faced fear and you found a way to work through it?
So I pause for a moment for this reason, Deborah, is at my age or this length of varied experiences I've had, I've made a lot of choices. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've done the good things and I've done bad things. And so sometimes it's which scab do I want to pick, or which scar do I want to point to as I tell the story? And what popped for me just now is it was March 2014, and I was going out to Seattle to sit down and be introduced to this team that I was going to now be a part of and lead. That was the company was Chinasoft, and Chinasoft had just bought an American company, and the ambition was to roll them together to launch the practice of the American company in that market, but then take over this $35 million business that was active in the market with this big team of very diverse people. And it was, at the core, it was a Chinese-based company. So many of the people on my team were Chinese, but we had people from all over the world. So it was, and I had done mergers and acquisitions, and so my toolkit I felt was very full, and I had my approach to go in there, and I expressed as we were together that day, the 40 some of us, and said, this is how I plan to open the door and address and plan to work together. And right away after that meeting, I was pulled aside and somebody came to me and he said, oh my gosh, you've never worked for a Chinese company, have you? I said, no, I've worked for a Japanese company, not a Chinese company. And they said, all the things you said in there will absolutely fail. That won't work here in this environment. So imagine that. It's just like I had just stepped in and said, I welcome you. This is how I work. I'm embracing you as a team. And then right away kind of ushered out and said, you can't say that. You can't do that. That's not the way it works. And I'm looking at it saying, but I think it does. And so then it became this challenge. And I think that is taking that shock of that statement and that fear of this is not the way it goes. You won't be able to be you and succeed here. And then that notion of I accept that challenge. And What happened in a 6-month period of time? So this was March, Deborah, and we were $5 million off pace. And they were telling me, don't worry about the numbers. You're going to get grace this year because that's not really your responsibility. And half of the contracts are coming up in the middle of the year, and we only renew at this rate. There was, many logistics around it. We got the team together in a 3-month period of time. We ended up renewing at close to 95%, unheard of with all the contracts. We went and met all the clients. We went and listened and talked to them. What were their experiences? I went personally over that period of time and met with all 170 people that were billing out with clients to understand their teams and what was going on. People were working in the same building, didn't even know each other that were working for us. Like crazy things, right? And all of a sudden this belief started happening. And now the team is saying, let's refresh everything we're doing. And I asked them can we get together once a week? Because everybody's scattered, nobody wanted to be in the office. So I spent my evenings out there, Deborah, cleaning the office. And not like vacuuming, but I mean, there were storage areas that I built shelves and put things in order. I built spaces for people to be. I moved all the offices around so people were in better places because it was just chaos. It wasn't a place that I wanted to be. So I created a physical environment that I wanted to be in and invited them in and just said, give me 6 weeks, just try this. And they said, now we want to refresh and paint. We had a big painting party. And then we started doing gatherings and outings, and they became a team. We were laughing, we were having fun together, and the productivity just soared. We beat the number, and those friendships last today. And I learned a new culture. I learned perspectives. We had probably 40 visa orchestrations going on at any one time. It was highly complex. I was learning to use new tools. And I think we lose our curiosity. We lose our humility sometimes in our ability to reset, to evaluate everybody else's experience around us, to learn from that, and then go back and rebuild the energy, rebuild the trust and belief, and watch people flourish and do more than I could have ever commanded them to do.
So, I mean, wow, that's just, that's a really beautiful story. And I would like to reel you back to that time when the guy pulled you aside and said, okay, you know what, with your funny ideas, like that's not going to work over here. How did you feel just at that moment? And what did you do to flip and decide, I'm going to win him over? It was a male, person, I imagine, man. And what fueled your inner drive to turn the team around?
At the moment, the feeling, and I can recall it right now. So I went flush in the face. I think my breathing probably shortened. So I think I physically recoiled with that. I probably felt a little bit of embarrassment, certainly doubt. Oh no, what have I done? I have an apartment. I've just moved out here. And the moment after that was just to take that moment of defeat and reflect on it. Do I believe that truth that was told to me from that perspective is indeed my truth? How did I come to believe that this is why I addressed the team that way? Well, that came from a lot of positive experiences and a lot of results doing that very thing. Recognizing that I had already been rejected several times before, people telling me that's not the way we do it. The a job not prior to that. I was at the President's Club retreat down in Mexico at a beautiful resort, and I was pulled aside and they said, "We can't argue with the results, Mike, but we don't like the way you do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the way we lead here. For you to be part of our senior leadership team, you have to start behaving more like us." So I got on the plane going back from Cabo, knowing that I was leaving that company,
Oh,
because
wow.
I didn't want to be them.
Mm-hmm.
And you would think that if I'm doing 150% of objective and I'm there receiving a trophy and getting a bonus that paid for 2 of my kids' colleges, that they would say, "Gosh, how did you do that?" Instead it was, "You can't be you, you have to become us."
And that, yeah, and that story that you know is because you really stand in your sovereignty. You know who you are, and you stand in your power, and you have that, you know exactly what you're worth, and that's it's a very important leadership value that not many have.
And what I'll say, Deborah, is it took me a day, but only a day,
Yeah.
one night's sleep,
Mm-hmm.
to come back into, no, I'm willing to fail. I am going to go forward this way because
Mm-hmm.
that failure is actually, I would embrace it, because I don't really want to change my belief in this is the way we need to treat people and this is the way we can succeed. The end to that story is at the end of that year with Chinasoft, right? So after we had made all those changes, senior executives from the holding company in China started coming over and looking at this business entity, but they were flying into Seattle and meeting with all the, people on the team to get this idea of like, what's really going on here?
Mm-hmm.
There's this transformation happening. And they were getting it from the viewpoint of those that were participating from my Chinese teammates. And so executives from China kept coming in, taking a look, and I knew that they were checking up, right? But I welcomed that. And because I believed in the team and I knew that they were going to be honest with their experiences. So at the end of that year, I was sent a bonus that was unscheduled. It wasn't part of any objectives. They just sent me.
Wow. Yeah.
It didn't matter what it could have been $1, right? But they sent through an extra thank you.
Yeah.
For changing the culture and building an environment where their team was happy.
Mm.
They were thriving. They believed in what we were doing. That's a reward that you can't pay for. And I hope that story fits into leading dragons.
No, it certainly does. And I was actually going to sort of joke and say, well, did you not go, well, where's my Rolex? What they do in Switzerland, right? They're like, okay, that you're not even sent a bonus, you're sent a Rolex. So let's look about now, because now we're over 1 year into the global pandemic. And change is really accelerating now. And leadership models, business models are collapsing slowly, and our resources consequently are in front of us, we're seeing resources falling away.
Yes.
1 in 3 businesses are going to be pushed out of business in the next 10 years. And I was just kind of doing I just did a quick mind map, just before we started speaking. I was like, yeah, so it's funny because we talk about company changes, and there's some words that just irk me, and one which is change initiatives. Anyway, so we'll just park that to the side for now, right? But just thinking about everything like recruitment, seriously, like, do people really know what they're looking for when they recruit people? Development. why is growth, not even growth, I can't call it growth, why are learning programs prescribed today? I mean, why, how can you prescribe somebody's development? And this is what you touch in your book, in Believership. Measurement, you know, performance management, and how they measure individual performance, you know, and you're just thinking, how does that even work? If you're wanting to, on the one hand, you want to leverage your team's intelligence and you want to team build, but you still got the old performance systems in place.
Right.
And there's so much to be done. We're talking about conscious leadership, and you know, you said the last time I asked somebody how, if you had 100 leaders who consider themselves conscious leaders, how many? He said 5%. You say 1%. So even just self-awareness. So if we have to start from changing from within, we need to even start tapping into that place and into that sovereignty that you beautifully illustrated in your story. And then retention. And there's a lot of job insecurity more and more today. I mean, there's so much going on. There's so much that needs to be transformed. Where do you believe, Mike, organizations, if they don't even know where to start, where could they start?
I believe that if we, in all of our systems that run our business, if we look at the greatest influence on all those systems, it is our human capacity that seems to be shrinking, not expanding, and ingenuity and creativity, which is said to be the now most important skills we need to see in people. Yet we have no tolerance to bring in creative people. It's like, well, we want to take somebody that's doing that function now and just, color outside the lines a little bit. And that's not really the answer, right? So we need to bring in new ideas and new people, and we have to have an environment where they can thrive. So across the board, I believe it truly is putting people as the number one priority, not as a general statement of, hey, our people are important, but in a very orchestrated, strategic manner to say, if we put the human being at the top priority in this orchestrated system, this strategy, what changes? And make the change accordingly. Because when people are thriving and when people are operating with security and with the belief system and with the room for them to be themselves, we will accomplish more, and we will then become innovative. We will invite ingenuity. But right now, Deborah, we're still caught in you say measures, right? And here's the reality of most structures and the systems we build around it. From the human element, from the individual person element, we have a standard of sameness, and we measure everybody in accordance with that standard of sameness, not uniqueness, right? So if you're unique, you're on the fringe, that's not the coveted position. And in our measures, we look at experience, right? So we look at employee experience. We measure against an experience we are telling you to have, rather than asking you the experience you're actually having. So I will say, Deborah, this is the experience you're told to have at this company, and we're measuring you. You don't seem to be having it. You're failing. Instead of saying, what experience are you having right now, and how can we make this work better for you? Our systems are built from the outside in. They condense all of the goodness, the ability, the capacity of people. instead of open it up and let it flourish and explore. We've built the systems wrong.
Do you know, I'm listening to you, Mike, and I'm thinking when I grew up in London, and I was at a girls' school, and my brothers obviously at a boys' school, and we all wore uniforms from head to toe, including summer uniforms, winter uniforms. Our shoes had to be shiny. We had to have a belt, and we had a little zip on the side with a belt with a 50p coin in it, in case where we were found stranded somewhere and we had to make a telephone call, because obviously there were no. And I'm just thinking back then, and there's still a lot of those schools. I don't know how much in the States, but definitely in England. Excuse me. And it was uniformity, and uniformity was strength. Uniformity was identity. Uniformity was power. Uniformity was control. And that was, at the time, it worked. And at the time, people adhered to it, because we do have that sense of belongingness. Now, all that seems, there's a big question mark in it. It's like, well, what is strength today? What is being in a strong position today? And it's like you mentioned, you said about innovation and but I don't think, I mean, my question is to you, is it still an option only, or is it a luxury to invite innovation and creative thinking into an organization?
My personal belief on this, and it's from what I have seen in business, and when I see the acceleration of change and disruption that's happening, and I'll put it in the context. You had mentioned the pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. What if the pandemic is just a precursor for greater changes that are going to be demanded upon us? So the volcano in Iceland finally erupted, right? Beautiful, and hopefully everybody's safe. But it's pretty amazing to watch the lava, spew and run from a volcano. But there were 1,000 earthquakes that took place over a short period of time leading up. So we knew that was happening. Those were the rumblings, right? And I just to put this in a frame of to explore, what if this pandemic, this year of disruption that has forced many people to rethink a lot of systems, what if that's just one of the 1,000 tremors, earthquakes, and this isn't even the volcano?
Yeah.
And what I'll say is, all indications from a technology standpoint, from a globalization standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from a human desire and movement standpoint, that these are just tremors. That change is going to be more significant and more rapid than at any time in history, and we're still not preparing people for that inevitability. We still are creating systems to say, let's get back to the way it was. Let's find our rhythm of sameness again, because that felt like we had control. And what I'll say is, we have an opportunity to create the change we want to see, rather than continue to responding to the change that's happening from the outside in.
Yeah, and just like you say, those that hang on desperately to these these structures that are collapsing anyway, they're gonna, if you keep holding on, you're just gonna have dust. And they're the ones that they're the ones at the end who are going to be left behind, because they're still hanging on to their denial. And so this is an invitation to release. We need to start releasing the ways that we've always done things. Of course, we are creatures of habit. We love our comfort. Well, you know what? That's something of the past now. And this year, in fact, the next 2 years is very much preparation time. And it starts, just like we said earlier, and like you say several times in your book, it starts from ourselves. What is it that and until we can shift the way that we see things, we can't expect anything else to change.
Right. And I love the way you state that. And I think that if we look at two words that have the preface, right? So prepare, as you said, how much of our energy actually goes to prevent? I don't want that new inevitability to happen, so I'm going to work on preventing it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
the preparation is secondary
Mm-hmm.
to the evidence that's in place that these changes are going to take place.
Mm-hmm.
Technology will continue to challenge us. It's expanding without control. It's in more in our lives than we want to admit, and we're not preparing people to understand how they play in that
Mm-hmm.
new ecosystem. And so we want to prevent. We want to prevent danger. We want to. There's all these new risks out there. How do we prevent them from happening to us? And instead of saying, let's embrace that risk and prepare to succeed with it. And so if I was to, I think right now, that's really one of my focuses. Are we preparing or are we preventing? And which strategy do we truly believe in?
And so this is an invitation to shift from the contracted state, so the fear-based drivers, where we would prevent, and actually just start acceptance and releasing and moving into an expanded state. And like we say what you focus on expands. So the question comes down to each one of us, isn't it? Which is, well, what do I choose to focus on? Do I choose to focus on my fear and get riddled with it, or do I choose to focus on my courage? And in fact, courage, I don't know, Mike, if you've got any nuances in French, but courage actually comes from the word cœur in French.
Yes.
It means heart. So courage does come from the heart, and this comes back to heart-based leadership.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that. I think often missed core. And people say, what can we do? Because we often think, how do I get that institution to make some great change? Maybe if I just go yell at them very loudly, they'll change. And that's a hopeful strategy, I guess, but I haven't seen evidence that it works.
Yeah.
But I do believe, Deborah, that if we want to create change in our world and around us, start with taking great care of those next to you. When we start showing more love and caring for the other, great change becomes possible. And that's a dramatic shift in belief in the systems we walk into and experience today.
And that's a beautiful invitation to our listeners, which is a beautiful takeaway, which is, if start by reconnecting with the people around you on a daily, and caring, and that will also remind us to care for ourselves. Mike, we're going to have to wrap up. I don't know where the time has gone, because I feel that we could dive into different parts of the organization and other things. So maybe we'll have to schedule another one later this year, if Wonderful. You're up for it. And thank you very much.
It's such a pleasure, and I commend you for the great work you're doing, Deborah. The strength and the heart that you're bringing forward, sharing ideas and inviting in that exploration, so we can each discover our next best step forward. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and I forgot one last thing, is I met Mike, and we met each other through Humans First. Mike, who is the founder of Humans First Community, which is a global community which brings people together and are who challenge the status quo and who are working together in the same direction to improve and bring the human back into the center of everything that it is that we do. I don't know, how was that for a summary?
Beautiful. You belong at Humans First, and it's just an open invitation to come and explore. humansfirst.club is a place to start. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. Thank you.
Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.